Hello, good afternoon. You are listening to the podcast of the Budapest City Archives in cooperation with the Goethe Institute in Budapest and the CU Podcast Library. My name is Andrea Pető, a professor at Central European University Vienna, fellow at the Central European University Democracy Institute Budapest, and at the moment a research fellow at the University of Bielefeld, CIF, the Centrum für Interdisziplináre Forschung, Global Contestations of Gender Rights. A resolution was adopted by the General Assembly of the Budapest capital with a majority of the opposition to the governing Fidesz party in January 2020 about erecting the monument to women raped in war in 2022 with an international bid and discussed by an international jury. This process will involve broad historical and artistic expertise and promises a transparent process involving a public debate. To prepare this process, with the financial support of the Goethe Institute Budapest, members of the Standing Committee preparing the monument, interviewing internationally known scholars about relevant issues, which might be helpful for those preparing a bid for erecting this monument to women raped in war. Today, we will be talking about forgetting with Aleida Assmann. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
Hi, Andrea. I'm happy to see you.
Thank you. Some word. Aleida Assmann really doesn't need an introduction still. Aleida Assmann was born in 1947 and she's an emeritus professor of English and Cultural Studies. She taught English and General Literary Studies at the University of Konstanz and took part in fellowship programs at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Berlin, at the A.B. Warburg House in Hamburg. She worked as a guest professor at the universities of Rice, Princeton, Yale, Chicago, and Vienna. Her publications include in Dickicht der Zeichen, in The Labyrinth of Science in 2015, Der lange Schatten der Vergangenheit, The Long Shadow of the Past, 2014, Das neue Unbehagen an der Erinnerungskultur, The New Unease Towards the Culture of the Remembrance, 2013, Ist die Zeit aus dem Fugen, Aufstieg und Niedergang des Zeitregimes der Moderne, Has Time Lost Its Equilibrium? Rise and Fall of the Time Regime in Modernity, 2013. Erinnerungsräume, Formen und Wandlungen des kulturellen Gedächtnisses, Spaces of Remembrance, Forms and Changes in Cultural Memory, 2011. Today we are discussing two topics which are important for this monument: the importance of memory in transformative politics and the forms of forgetting in relation to the planned monuments of victims of wartime rape in Budapest. So let's start with understanding complexities of memory and then continue with forgetting. You claim in your work that memory can play a key role in processes of change and transition because it is itself flexible and has a transformative quality. So what are the methodological premises of working with memories of dark events?
Okay, thank you for this introductory question. Well, you're absolutely right. Memory is flexible. In this sense, it is not a photo of the events that happened in the past. It is much more of a coping mechanism with dealing with events in the past. This means that it is always a position taking, and this includes an emotional response and also a critical judgment. For this reason, it is important that it happens always in a different time frame and also in a different frame of values, and from the one that in which it originally occurred. So that means that memory, in fact, is a form of retrospection, and one could also say retroactive reflection. Therefore, it can have an impact on the past in the present.
Thank you. This is really important because this planned monument has got this transformative potential. As the topic of wartime rape has been tabooized for so long. So memory is not only susceptible to changes, it itself a powerful agent of change. Can you give examples about tragic, dramatic, dark events being memorialized and how these memorialization processes themselves become agents of change?
When we talk about memory as an agent of change, I think I have used the phrase quite often also in a book on political memory and its in transition processes. We, of course, have to acknowledge that there is something happening here. First of all, the grammar of social and political memory has to change. It has to accept also dark events and not gloss over them or cover them up in silence or oppose these possible testimonies. In other ways, it is not the memory itself that can introduce this change. It is always a social or political frame that has to be built up in a society. And an example how this can come about is perhaps Germany itself, in which a country in which it took, West Germany in this case, 5 decades before this memory eventually had a chance to emerge and to break through eventually and become part of socially accepted and political memory. And this was an event that happened bottom up. It was not a top-down process. So I think building this frame is a very important process. It depends on democratic societies that create a debate about it. And it is the debate actually that can introduce a new frame.
In your work, you are underlining that it is not possible to neatly separate remembering and forgetting. Why is that so? And can you give an example?
You asked me for examples. I would also like to give a brief example for the transition of the memory, and that would be the comfort woman. The comfort women, the Korean and Chinese comfort women that were abused in forced prostitution by Japanese soldiers in the Second World War. So by now, they have become almost something like a global icon. There are statues all over the world for them, newly risen, but in the country of the perpetrators, there is still a total lack of response to this historic event. So this is a very uneven situation, and it is something that is, again, always built on the frames in the specific country, and the question whether it can pierce the silence and become, in a way, a new hegemonic memory in order to support these testimonies.
Thank you for bringing in this example, because we also know that there is this big debate now in Berlin about this monument where the different political forces in Germany are actually, conflicting about the future of this monument.
Exactly. And this is also why you can see in this example how remembering and forgetting interact. The more one group starts to remember, the more the other one will rise, or contrary one will rise and try to oppose it. It is really something that is happening at the same time, and that makes it politically so controversial and also important.
In your work, you are also analyzing the process how counter-memory becomes a normative memory. Can you again give an example about this regarding this process?
Actually, when I referred to the very slow emergence of the Holocaust memory in Germany, I think this was a kind of counter-memory because it was there from the start. And everybody who says, well, it was there, cannot, as a historian does, who always refers to sources, say it was there altogether. It was never there altogether. There were just very isolated enclaves of this memory, which had a very hard time to get heard. Because for public memory or social memory to be heard, it always needs those who accept it, take it on and listen. And the testimonies were glossed over, they were silenced. And it took really until the 1990s, which is called the decade of testimonies, or the decade of the witness by Annette Viviorca, until these testimonies were finally heard and changed actually also the political climate and also the values of the national frame of Germany after the reunification.
You pointed out that memory is always changing. So why is that important, that memory can change private to public, unofficial to official, normative to counter memory, local to global, national to transnational? So why is this list relevant for our today's memory projects, and especially for this particular project of the city of Budapest?
I think you can add another pair to your list, which is already impressive, and that is male and female perspectives. I recall Ruth Klüger and her book Surviving Auschwitz, Weiterleben. Keep on living is the title in German, and she describes situations even in conversations in the United States with her husband, who is a historian and a GI of the American Army, so part of the Allies, and she was part of those who suffered in various concentration camps in Eastern Europe. And when they had this conversation, she immediately knew she had no place in this conversation. There was not an established language for her experience to utter at all. Of course, this was an extreme experience, but every female point of view of the experience of war is dramatically different from those of the male participation. And therefore, it took a long time to develop this language and to also create this empathic point of view, to include that into our way of speaking, talking, and creating a new resonance for this experience as well.
So this was the hopeful and positive part of the interview, which has been exploring the possibilities of and the opportunities of memory and the fluidity and the interactions of different memories. Now let's move to the topic of forgetting. So the basis of this discussion will be your book published by the Wallstein Verlag in 2016, The Different Forms of Forgetting. The title is Forms of Forgetting. And in your book, you are claiming that forgetting is a filter, as a weapon, and as a prerequisite is for creation of new things. Can you explain this to the listeners, as this planned monument is fighting against forgetting the rapes committed by soldiers and civilians during wartime?
Yes, indeed. I thought there are really very different kinds of forgetting. I'm always interested in sorting out things that are complicated and try to create also an intellectual tool to dealing with them. So thank you for picking this up and bringing it into our conversation. I think one possibility of forgetting is just to create a filter. We always have too much information. We need to focus. And this is also a situation that memory and attention span are in a way connected. That could be a more neutral function. But then there is the positive possibility to use it as a tool, use it as a requisite or whatever, a tool to do something to improve the state of the society and also the state of those who have suffered from the past. And but a third possibility is that of using it as a weapon. And here the age-old damnatio memoriae, for instance, is an example. It is silencing a person, and after it's his or her death is a way of a second death. It's really erasing, blotting out the name, because the name that lives on is also part of that person's identity. And therefore it is a very severe attack that can be done, very violent attack with forgetting. And also another way is to suppress the testimony of the other side. That is the defensive form of forgetting, and it is usually used after regime changes. The party that had reigned tries to get rid of all the sources and traces, so it can no longer be held responsible afterwards. And this happened, for instance, in South Africa after apartheid, or in East Germany after the reunification with the Stasi documents, which luckily were preserved.
In this book, The Forms of Forgetting, you examine collective forms of forgetting in social, political, and cultural contexts, culminating in the question of the impossibility of forgetting on the internet. How does that change the dynamics of forgetting?
The internet has totally changed the situation of remembering and forgetting, because these frames that we talked about, the social and political frames, are not very active in this space. Anybody can enter it and introduce something on his or her own. So we have a flourishing, we could argue, grassroots memory. Everybody puts in what he or she thinks fit and is really attached to. But the outcome is not that positive at all, because it is a very chaotic space and it is ungroomed. And therefore, I think what happens is right now that it is also a source, a very dangerous source for people who just look for information that they already corroborate, that they believe in, that they confirm, and therefore they stay totally in a close proximity with those opinions that they already share. So it is not an educational source. It could be, but it is not used as such, and therefore it has really complicated the general memorial situation, because now you can lobby in various ways and also undermine social consensus, which is actually happening right now in Europe in many ways on the part of the right reactionary movements.
So in this book, you outline 7 different forms of forgetting. As you said, you like making things complicated and explain very difficult processes in a kind of intellectual way. The first 3 you claim that are morally neutral forms, like automatic, preservative, and selective forgetting. Can you explain these terms and give some examples?
Again, I think memory has a lot to do with attention. And attention is something that is a pre-given, an anthropological given. We need attention to be able to focus. And the space of memory, as I like to put it in a very really easy and simple way, is that it does not afford a lot of space. It is itself a theater in which battles are fought, and it is really controlled by emotions. Not only attention span, but also emotions, because these emotions try to keep this space tidy and not to have things intrude that are conflicting with the self-image of the person. And this becomes really important once we think about collective self-images of groups, nations, societies. And if then there is a political support to keep this space groomed and tidy and sort of void of everything that could conflict or be in opposition to that opinion, it will become censored very, very, very quickly, either by continuous social habits, like in the United States, where it's difficult to bring in new aspects of the past, or by top-down legislation, as happens in some Eastern European countries. So it is really a very dramatic and dynamic space, and it is important to distinguish these 3 different forms of forgetting.
Then you define 2 darker forms of forgetting, repressive and defensive. Repressive forgetting is what you call memoricide, or killing of the memory of persons or groups, and is inflicted upon others. Defensive forgetting is the destruction of evidence to protect perpetrators. Can you give again examples to these 2 dark forms of forgetting?
Yes, exactly. Again, I recall a very ancient Egyptian saying. It says, a man, usually in ancient Egypt, it's a man who lives whose name is being named, whose name is being called or brought up in conversation. So as long as he's named, he's still among the people who live. So damnatio in memoriae, as I said, is a very severe crime already in ancient Egypt. But this is something that has been politically used very often in connection with genocides. So the Armenian genocide was also a way of silencing voices and of really opposing any kind of testimonials who tried to emerge after the event. And Hitler, in 1939, shortly before he started his invasion into Poland, in August said, "Who today still speaks of the Armenians?" So this is the dream of the perpetrators, to keep everything covered and to have silence reign. And therefore, it's a very dark side to promote silence by destroying testimonies. And the other way, actually, the examples of South Africa, and the GDR are important here. The Stasi documents actually survived only because some very courageous protesters of the revolution entered a hunger strike. Otherwise, West and Eastern German politicians would have destroyed the whole set of Stasi documents. That is the dark side of forgetting.
In your book, you concluded on a lighter note, defining the constructive and therapeutic forms of forgetting. To constructively forget, a person moves forward without observing the past and with a clear consciousness. Do you think that it is all possible? And what is the role of historical research in that process?
Well, you picked a very important point. When I say this is positive or constructive, I was not necessarily endorsing it. But what I wanted to show is that it was the normal and normative form of dealing with the past in modernist Western societies. And mind you, whether East or West, Europe. For instance, the first stanza of the national anthem of the GDR started with the words, "Auferstanden aus Ruinen und der Zukunft zugewandt." This means, risen from the rubbles of the ruins, we are now addressing the future, a bright future. So this was this promise of the Western, as I call it, Western time regime of modernity. You had that. This was the idea of modernism altogether. You had to erase the past in order to create something new and to gain the future. And this is something that has totally changed, I think, with the new memory paradigm. We are now more sensitive to not letting the past go, because this is still a resource for some, if not for all, who want to just go ahead into a future that we no longer really have access to. So I think it is creative in the sense of you forget the past in order to do something new, but it is not necessarily any longer our orientation. But it used to be a central Western perspective. And the other way, the lighter way, the therapeutic way, is to ease the burden of the past. Those who cannot make the past go away and still should not be blocked by it, but acknowledge its weight and do not refute it, but accept it in a way, they also can lighten this burden. And this is the therapeutic version that Freud also, I think, had in mind, although he wanted to make memory disappear altogether, more or less. But I think forming a more inclusive memory of it is also a form of lightening this burden. Therefore, I call it therapeutic.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. And I hope that those who are considering to submit a bid for this monument will get lots of inspiration from our discussion. The recording will be available at the CEU Podcast Library, the website of the Goethe Institute in Budapest, and the webpage of the project, www.elhallgatva.hu. Thanks again for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think your project can really do a lot as a therapeutic project for the society, not just for individuals. So good luck with it. And thank you for our conversation.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.